Joining us. We'll see you next week. However, that conversation that I mentioned earlier on is commencing right now. I'm joined by the spokesperson, Raila. That's Raila Odinga's presidential campaign, Professor Makau Mutua. Later on, I will be speaking as well to the UDA chairman, Johnston Muthama. So for that and much more, do cross over to KTN News. All right, so time for that conversation. Remember, you can get in touch with us at KTN News KE. I'm at Sophia Wanuna. You can also text in 22177 is our SMS number. Makau Mutua, professor, is a spokesperson, as I mentioned there, of the Raila Odinga presidential campaign. Prof, thank you very much for making time for Checkpoint this evening. A lot to discuss. First things first, is the former premier back in the country?
He's arriving soon.
Tonight?
Most likely, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
He's been away for 1 week. I wonder if there's any sentiment, what you'd say about the kind of trip he has had. A lot of attention previously was on the deputy president when he was in the UK and the US. And then we saw the former prime minister as well tour of the UK the past 1 week. Any highlights you'd mention for us tonight?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Sophia.
Karibu.
I'm glad to be here with you. The former Prime Minister is not a stranger to international travel. As you know, he's an international statesman who has spent most of his life really in the public eye, both in Kenya but also abroad, especially in Europe and the United States. His trip there was meant to reacquaint himself with folks, reintroduce himself as a candidate for Azimio, and to explain his platform going forward. Obviously, the deputy president was also there. Yeah. But as we all know, the deputy president has scant international experience. I think, if I'm not wrong, he's only visited 3 countries in the Western world. And so the contrast could not be bigger.
But we have not seen, is he planning, the former premier, to visit the US as well in this season?
We are thinking about it, and it's likely to happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what has caused a lot of confusion in the last couple of days. So we saw Raila Odinga endorsed as the Azimio, and that's the place I want us to begin, whether it's Azimio la Umoja presidential candidate or is it Azimio One Kenya Alliance presidential candidate. The last I think we heard from you, you maintained it's Azimio la Umoja. Kalonzo Musyoka maintains the document he signed speaks and indicates it's Azimio One Kenya Alliance. What is the position?
Let me just state categorically and unequivocally to remove any doubt that the documents that were signed were documents to form a political party, a coalition political party known as Azimio la Umoja. The discussions, conversations by Mr. Kalonzo Musyoka about Azimio la Umoja, OKA, what he's been calling the three-legged stool, is an interesting sort of take by him. I've watched him as he has been thinking through and metamorphosing almost by the day in terms of his own positioning within Azimio la Umoja. And you know, Sophia, that is not a bad thing. It's good when people speak out in public because you know what they're thinking. I'd rather he speaks out than he keeps quiet. You know, because then we will not know what he's thinking, so that we can respond to him. Yeah. So I think it's a good thing that he's speaking out, and I think the issues that he's been raising will be settled in due course.
Yes, because it would appear there are 2 agreements here. There was the one signed at KICC by the 26 parties, and that was to the extent of the flag bearer, the presidential candidate, which is Raila Odinga, and that spoke of the Azimio movement. But then he brings in this meeting in State House where it's this three-legged stool, and he says in the presence of the president, the former prime minister and himself is where they agreed it's Azimio One Kenya Alliance, but that even the name is still a contentious issue amongst other issues we'll discuss this evening.
Yes.
Surely this is not the way to begin a union, is it?
Well, I mean, political alliances are always works in progress. And so, we take that as a given. But let me just say, first of all, the notion of a three-legged stool in a constitutional setup is a non sequitur, by which I mean that it's something that is not logical in Kenya's constitutional framework. See, political parties, Sophia, are formed to capture state power. Azimio-OKA Umoja is a government in waiting. In our constitutional structure in Kenya, there is nothing like a three-legged stool. There's not a three-legged executive. There can't be a three-legged executive. That would be constitutional heresy. You cannot have a presidency that is divided into three parts, into three stools. The only three-legged animal that I know of that exists...
Judiciary, executive,
exactly. It's only that is the only three-legged animal there that exists. But even in that case, those three legs, are independent of one another. Yeah. Let me just say, parenthetically here, that the notion of a three-legged stool in a constitutional government is what I would call constitutional heresy. And Mr. Musyoka is a senior counsel, a very accomplished lawyer. I'm sure he knows this. He knows you cannot divide the government, into 3/3. It is not possible. He knows that there is only one president at a time. There's only one flag bearer who is going to carry Azimio-OKA Umoja candidacy to the finish line, and who's going to form government. The government will not be formed, in essence, by three presidents or three co-presidents. Mr. Odinga will win the election, and you'll be the president of this country.
And you have the headline today in the Standard talking about that deal. And Mr. Musyoka has referenced this in the past, that this deal entails a third going to Kalonzo Musyoka, another third to the president, current seating, and then Raila Odinga. So what you're saying tonight, people can have conversations, but to the extent of what stands in law, this has no weight, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Constitution of Kenya deposits, or reposits rather, I should say, executive authority in the president.
Right.
Who is also the head of state, and who is also the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. If you read the Constitution clearly, there is no provision which would indicate that the president's hands can be tied once they are in office, once they are elected. Mr. Odinga will compose the government. I am sure that the government that he composes will be inclusive. I am sure that he will respect the coalition partners within Azimio. I am sure he will consult them extensively in forming his government. But he'll be the president, and he'll form the government. So
then your position and statement tonight, as far as you're concerned, as spokesperson for Raila Odinga, is that there is no such deal as to share government once they, for instance, if Raila Odinga were to win, three-way. There is no such plan.
Such a deal does not exist. What I should say, and to be just clear with you, is that Azimio is a broad coalition. It's a broad church, if you will, in which 26 parties have come together. We expect that all 26 parties will be accommodated in government at various levels of government, one way or another. That is what I can tell you tonight.
And yet the statement, and when Kalonzo Musyoka made public what he claimed to be the deal in NASA between himself and the former Prime Minister, which you are involved in, again had details of how government would be shared and responsibilities later years of what would have been a Raila presidency. So you are involved in that, but now you're saying this kind of an arrangement cannot suffice.
I think, Sophia, your very able colleague, Ken Mejungu, tried very hard to get me to cough up the information that you are now seeking.
Right.
I told him, and I'll tell you, and the audience, that there are legal requirements which bind me from, disclosing any agreements that I may or may not have been involved in. I saw a document that Mr. Musyoka made public, I read the document like you did. I saw it. I cannot deny or confirm that document.
All right, let's then move on to then what would appear is for Kalonzo Musyoka at this point. He's been said to be driving a very hard bargain. Critics, analysts observing his moves in the recent past. We're hearing as recent as yesterday, his allies talking about not taking less than the running mate, deputy president position in all of this, because then he's been a vice president in the past. He has deputized Raila in running for president the last 2 elections. So is this something that you think he should be comfortable waiting to see how things play out?
Yeah, so I think we should sort of state for the public to understand that the duty and the job, of picking a running mate is a prerogative of the presidential candidate. He picks the running mate. Obviously, he's holding, wide consultations with coalition partners. He's consulting even scholars and other people whom he thinks should be consulted to arrive at a choice that, number one, will add to his vote tally,
right?
Who will be attractive to various regions, and a person who he can work with, a person who can be ready to step in on day one should something happen to the president. So these are the things that he's looking for in arriving at a running mate. I would say that no one is ruled in and no one is ruled out. That process is ongoing.
Do you think the running mate slot, that decision, is going to be a make or break for either your campaign or your competitors?
I think for Azimio, we do not think that the choice of a running mate is going to be, the turning point for the campaign. We're very happy with where we are standing right now. I think you've seen the polling. We are doing extremely well, knock on wood.
Yeah, but polls, they can completely...
They can change, and I know that it's just a snapshot of a particular moment in time.
Correct.
But at this moment, we are doing well. What I would say to you is that I think we have flexibility on our side to choose a running mate from any part of the country, really. I think, on the other hand, however, the other side does not have that option.
How so?
Well, I think Mr. Ruto has committed himself to appointing someone, from Central Kenya, or from the Mount Kenya region, I should say, as running mate. And I think you've heard statements by some of his closest allies, including Mr. Gachagua, saying that Mr. Mudavadi will not be considered as a running mate, although I think, Mr. Mudavadi's allies are pushing for him to be so appointed. But Mr. Gachagua said that Mr. Mudavadi knew when he came on board that that was off the table. So we can only surmise that Mr. Ruto will choose someone from Central Kenya. The only thing that I think is evident at this point is that none of the people around him and the people who are being considered as his running mate have any gravitas. If anything, they have some of the most sordid, histories in this country's political landscape.
But on the Azimio side, do you have any individuals from the Mount Kenya region, to use your words, that have gravitas? Because they're those who have opined, even say with Kalonzo, and we go back to that, even if you was to bring the entire Ukambani block, it still is not half of the Mount Kenya region. So then if the DP were to go with a Central Kenya running mate, does that almost force the hand of Raila Odinga in as far as the implication of choosing not to go that direction?
Not really, Sophia. I think, and I know that you're a good student of history, and you know that Mr. Odinga has won elections before without Mount Kenya. I think the one election that was not contested in terms of its outcome was in 2007. I think there was a general consensus that Mr. Odinga won that election. Well, he won that election without Mount Kenya. This time around, I think we are very lucky. We've made serious inroads into Mount Kenya. We think that we'll get a very high percentage, even be able to split the vote in Mount Kenya.
Really? Because the deputy president appears to be having a strong lead and hold of that region.
Not really. Not really. I mean, if you look at polling now, the current polling, it shows that we are making gains in the Mount Kenya region.
Right.
Yeah, and August is way off. Is way off from now. So we expect to make serious progress, and we expect to have our surrogates from the region, help us do that.
So on the other side, you have the likes of, as you mentioned, Gachagua, there's Governor Anne Waiguru and others. On Azimio side, who are those that would be considered? We're just, roughly speaking. Peter Kenneth? What are the names that would be in that pool?
I think you've seen names thrown around in the press.
Throw some around for us.
No. Can I take a pass? Can I take a pass on this one? I think that, that there are plausible people who have been mentioned. You know their names as well as I do. And I think they're all plausible, really, quite frankly. And then there are others who have not been mentioned, who might be considered. So it's I would say the book at this point is open.
But
it's a blank slate.
So tonight you have dismissed what Kalonzo has been talking about, this three-legged stool and this sharing of government if Raila Odinga were to win. You're also saying the running mate position is definitely not one that he can bank on as a given.
Yes.
Are you not seeing that this tension around Kalonzo and the position he takes and the reaction and feedback coming from your end would risk his stay within Azimio, because he says he's ready to bolt? And if he does, whilst Odinga has won, as you claim, without Mount Kenya, he has had Kalonzo by his side in the last two elections.
Yeah, that is true. But you see, Mr. Musyoka is a seasoned politician. I don't think that he came into Azimio without very serious thought and consultations with a wide variety of people. I can disclose here that I've always been talking to him. He is my friend. I know his thinking about these issues. I respect him. I was very pleased he came to Azimio. So I think he came to Azimio purposely because Mr. Musyoka knows what is at stake in this country on August the 9th.
Yeah.
He has said, and you have heard him say it repeatedly, categorically, that he cannot join a band of thieves. He said that openly, that he is ruled out.
He also said he would be stupid, his words, to work with the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga again, his words.
But he's also said, Sophia, if we can trade, he said, she said, he's also said that it's only a fool who doesn't change his mind. And
so he would then change his mind to work with the so-called thieves.
I think he's been so categorical about that, it's not possible, really. I think what is happening with Mr. Musyoka is that, he's trying to find his place within Azimio. And I think that's okay. Let him find his place within Azimio. I think that he said openly that the running mate position has not been promised to him. He was very clear about that those discussions were never had. And that is a fact. It does not mean that those discussions will not be had. They might be had. We certainly hope and expect that he will stay within Azimio. Mr. Musyoka, when he has in the past deputized the former Prime Minister, he's done it to the very end. When he has come and brought his troops with him, they have stayed within that coalition in CORD, but also in NASA, as you remember. So I expect him to stay here. But I also
and if he doesn't?
Well, I mean, I said before that, what ifs, it could be many. I mean, tomorrow I may not wake up myself in the morning. I might not be able to wake up. Hopefully I'll wake up tomorrow morning.
We pray you do.
So we can never predict exactly what's going to happen. But if I was a betting man, I would bet today that Mr. Musyoka stays with us throughout.
And yet the factor of the governors from that region, Makau Mutua and Kivutha, do you think again, let's speculate here. If that was not to work out, that these three governors would be able to deliver the region for the former Prime Minister, for Azimio.
Yeah, let me say that I think Mr. Odinga is very pleased with the support, the unstinting support that he has received from Governor Ngilu, Professor Kibwana, Governor Makueni, Dr. Mutua, Governor Machakos. They have worked their tails off for him. And you've seen that, not just in Ukambani, but throughout the country.
Yeah.
Governor Ngilu in particular has been very, very, vocal throughout the country, which is great for our side. So that's wonderful. I think the coming on board of Mr. Musyoka seals the deal for the Ukambani vote. Mr. Musyoka is still, as I said before, and I will say it again here to you, Mr. Musyoka is one of 4 principal political leaders in this country. Okay, the first one being Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta, the second being Mr. Raila Odinga, Mr. Musyoka himself, who in my books is, a peg above Mr. Ruto, who is the 4th leader in this pecking order. So Mr. Musyoka is a substantial and substantive individual in this country's political, landscape. Very important. Him coming to Azimio, the benefit for that for us as a movement is incalculable. So
are you saying the Deputy President, Ruto, has a lower standing gravitas compared to Mr. Musyoka,
obviously,
former VP?
Obviously. Mr. Musyoka is a politician of long standing.
We don't see him go out, for instance, and hold rallies and see what kind of crowd pooling he would do. You see the Deputy President do that every other day. And sometimes people have questioned and said, there's a lot of boardroom politicking around the former Vice President. Yeah, but to the extent of the interaction with the masses outside his backyard is something is yet to be tested and seen. Yeah,
but Sophia, Prophet Owuro, and I will say prophet in quotes, also pulls crowds. But let me say this for your purposes. What I have seen the Deputy President do is run unopposed for the last 10 years for the presidency of this country. When you run for that long, and when your coffers appear to be bottomless in terms of how much money he can pump into churches, into schools and so on, he's literally camped, for example, in Mount Kenya. So we expect him to get those crowds because he's been running by himself. Now, my candidate, Mr. Odinga, has only been running for 4 or 5 months, and you've seen the type of crowds that he's pulling. You saw the other day the kind of crowd that he pulled in Meru. Extremely exciting, completely exciting. So if you are looking at a pecking order for the leaders who are the most senior in the political landscape, DP Ruto has, of necessity and by analysis, to come after Mr. Musyoka.
Right. Does the optics of how this race is shaping up concern you, perhaps? Because there is this feeling that President Uhuru Kenyatta, it's shaping up to be a race between him and his deputy, another Uhuruto, only that this time around they're on opposite sides, and that he's chaperoning Azimio, La Umoja, Azimio One Kenya Alliance. I don't want to get into trouble with all the various positions on this name, but his role that is so significant at the point he's exiting, how is that? How are you reconciling that as a team?
Well, first of all, let me say that you saw we unveiled Azimio la Umoja in Kasarani on December the 10th. Okay? Azimio la Umoja was a brainchild of our candidate, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga. The head of state did not come into the picture until very late into the game. In particular, you saw at our NDC, he came there for the ODM NDC, and he also came to Azimio for the unveiling of our flag bearer. Mr. Kenyatta is a voter. He's an important leader in this country. He's the head of state. The last time I checked, he was still the kingpin of Mount Kenya. You know, so his support is very important. You've seen Mr. Ruto wailing every day, crying like a baby about the lack of support that he has not received from the head of state. You know, why is it okay for Mr. Ruto to wish for the support of Mr. Kenyatta and not for Mr. Odinga to embrace that support? Why is that okay? You know, so I mean, what I would say to you is that we welcome the head of state's support, like every other Kenyan, any other Kenyan, I should say, and we hope that in fact he campaigns for us in the Mount Kenya region.
Yeah. Those campaigns are yet to begin, but again, it doesn't concern you, this Uhuru-Ruto duo in the making, that's how it at least is beginning to emerge and come across, as opposed to your candidate being front and center?
I think that, you know, the media loves a food fight.
Do we?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a food fight that I think you are enjoying. And trying to pit the head of state against his deputy. But let me say this, that is not the contest at stake. And if the contest is pitched that way, it works to the detriment of Mr. Ruto. And let me tell you why. A long time ago, when I was a teenager, I was dropped like a hot potato by a woman I was dating. I spent a week in bed, you know, wailing and crying, and I thought the world was going to end. Of course, it did not end. Mr. Ruto is acting like that Makau of so many decades ago. Waswahili wanasema ukiwachwa achika. You know, the guy should just forget about Mr. Kenyatta and go about his campaigns. Otherwise, Mr. Odinga is going to eat his lunch by a wider margin. You know, Mr. Kenyatta is not on the ballot. He is not. It is, in fact, I should say, Sophia, it's Mr. Ruto who has been attacking Mr. Kenyatta. You've seen his ungoverned mouth going off on tangents that are not relevant. You've seen him call for insurrection by the border against his own government. You've seen him go to Kiambu and say unprintable things about his boss. This man, the man from Sugoi, as I call him, he's coming unglued right before our very eyes. And so, you know, I know the media likes that, but he's the one who's driving that narrative. It is not Mr. Kenyatta. I don't think so, and certainly it is not us. The contest is between Mr. Odinga and Mr. Ruto. That is a contest.
But in Sagana 3, as it's now called, we saw the president also unequivocal about why he's choosing to support Raila Odinga and why Ruto is not the right person. And he also was very clear about what he felt were the issues that arose between the two up to this point. So what really we have seen from both parties is go at each other, hammer and tongs, which farasi wawili wakipigana nyasi yaumia.
Yeah, but surely in your house...
Fahari. Is it farasi or fahari?
Farasi.
Is it farasi? Okay.
Farasi wawili.
Like, sorry.
Yeah. But I think surely in your own household itself, if you have a child there, the child cannot just keep on talking back to the mother or to the daddy. I mean, you know, the deputy president is an inferior public official to the president. You cannot have equivalence there where you can have you know, them talking back at each other. I think you've seen the kind of language that the DP has used against Mr. Kenyatta. Yeah. It is language unbecoming, quite frankly. And you know, I shudder to think that a person with such anger, such bile, being elected to lead this country. Just one wonders what this man is capable of doing. You know, a person who does not seem to have, you know, something to govern his mouth. You know, I think our parents told us that, you know, you must think before you talk. He's not thinking. He's just talking without thinking. It's completely unacceptable. And I must say, you know, as a Kenyan myself, I am just appalled at the kind of language that he's using against, not just against, you know, the head of state, but against Mr. Odinga. Yeah. Unacceptable.
All right, and the thing that I see I'm getting a lot of messages on my very horrible. They said it's Fahali. Oh my goodness, wawili wakipigana. And then someone is saying Farasi UP. But speaking of Mr. Kenyatta, the president, some of his men have come out to say that he will choose the running mate for Raila Odinga, that is what was promised in this deal, in them coming together and working together, that he'll be the man with the final word.
Nothing could be further from the truth. Mr. Kenyatta himself has never said that. Obviously, one cannot prevent people from talking. You know, people, like I said, have mouths, and they will open those mouths and will form words. What I can tell you unequivocally is that Mr. Odinga will choose his running mate.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have the party primaries next month, April. These nominations will be one of those that will be watched and followed closely and keenly, just because of, again, in as far as holding together not only for ODM, but all of these constituent parties under Azimio, it could either bring together a very strong force for the candidate or start seeing a fallout. So how is it you're looking to manage this exercise in the next month?
Yeah, I mean, we are discussing now as we speak the nomination rules for Azimio. Our plan, our strategy, and our intention is to capture both the presidency and the legislature. We want to win overwhelmingly so that we can govern effectively and with a lot of legitimacy. Like I said, Azimio is a broad tent, right? And so what we want to make sure is that we do not cannibalize one another during nominations. Let us say, for example, there's a constituency in which there's a possibility of Jubilee or ODM or even PNU or NARC running. We will have to come together to agree on who the stronger candidate is for that particular seat. We are discussing those rules as they were, just to avoid, So
at this point, there is no clear way forward. Is it zoning, or it's not one size fits all in as far as the various?
Certainly not one size fits all. We think that there are places in which we will let people run and compete. But in other places where that will be suicidal, let us say, for example, you have an UDA candidate, okay, and then you have a Jubilee candidate and an ODM candidate and another candidate, PNU, let us say, for example. If we run, the UDA person will go through. Yeah. We can't afford that.
And yet you heard the sentiment by bring him back to this conversation, Kalonzo Musyoka, that he'll look to amass many big numbers, high numbers, so that then he can have that card to check Odinga if he was to win in as far as an impeachment is concerned.
I think that was said in jest.
In jest, he did say
I think it was said. I think it was said in jest.
But still, what if?
Well, Mr. Musyoka is a seasoned politician, as I said before. I don't think he meant that. He was just trying to, rib us a little bit.
All right, as we bring this to a close, you had the UDA NDC on Tuesday last week.
Yes.
One of the things that the Deputy President spoke about was accusing the President of presiding over a state capture and talked about the restoration of the strength and independence of institutions such as the judiciary, several of them in the criminal justice system, that would be done under his administration. What do you make of that remark?
Well, I was bemused and then angry. Angry because this is a deputy president who has squatted in office for 10 years, the last 5 of which he has been AWOL, absent without leave, drawing money from taxpayers, using state resources, security, you name it, buildings and so on. This is a deputy president who was part of the same government with Mr. Kenyatta. When he was given that government, I understand that he chose 50%, except for one person, I think Mr. Rashid Echesa, who is not qualified to be a cabinet person. Except that person, all the other choices that Mr. Ruto made were from his backyard, were from the Kalenjin community. So this is not a person who has any moral standing to speak. Don't forget also that Mr. Ruto is known for his scandals. Sophia, This man's scandals stretch from here to Timbuktu. I mean, they do, and you know that. You know, I mean, these two men could not be any more different. Mr. Odinga is a Democrat, small d, a man who has spent his entire life fighting for this country's freedom. Okay? Even went to detention for it for 10 years. What has Mr. Ruto done? What sacrifice has he made? Okay? And my understanding is that many of the ministries that have been very corrupt were the ones that were run by ministers that he appointed or he recommended be appointed. So how can he reform the same institutions that he has destroyed? It was laughable.
And yet, and the president also did speak to that point you just made around the ministries that had, the ministers appointed by purportedly the deputy president. And one wonders is why isn't then due process taking its course? Why are we not seeing prosecutions, evidence? Because we do have structures, there's a legal system that speaks to how these matters are canvassed. So as opposed to coming out for the president and others to say you're corrupt, you're this and you're the other, why not bring that evidence, submit it to the agencies responsible, and then due process takes course?
I think, Sophia, it's a fact that the institutions in this country that are supposed to fight corruption are themselves corrupt. And Mr. Ruto was a part of that process of making those institutions corrupt. He's one who has always said when someone is being accused or being indicted, he's always said you are politicizing the war on corruption. Well, when are we going to catch a thief, lock him up, and throw away the key without the deputy president saying that you are finishing my people, you are targeting my people, you are targeting my allies? So how can this same person who talks like this be the one who's going to clean up the system? It is like asking the wolf to go into the kitchen coop to guard the chickens. It can never work. Well,
thank you very much for joining us, Professor Makau Mutua.
Thank you very much.
It has been a pleasure to have you with us on Checkpoint.
Thank you very much, Sophia.
Asante sana.
Thank you.
And indeed, that conversation with the spokesperson of the Raila Odinga presidential campaign coming to an end here on Checkpoint. A tightrope that the former Prime Minister has to navigate, around 26 parties coming together under the Azimio umbrella, each hoping to have a bite, a piece, a slice of the cake. How will all that pan out? Time will tell. We want to now cross over to my next interview. I'm joined by the chairman of